My name is Doug Oitzinger. I'm a former mayor of the City of Marinette. I'm a current alderman for Ward 3, and I'm a member of Save Our Water, or SOH2O. However, the opinions expressed in this presentation are my own. They are not the official opinions of the City of Marinette or of SOH2O. This is a citizen's review of the Tyco JCI's proposed PFAS Groundwater Extraction and Treatment System, or GETS. What I'm going to do is compare Tyco's communications to the public with the communications they've had with the DNR. The public communications that Tyco JCI has produced involves this fact sheet, which they have posted on their website, and they have directly mailed or inserted in newspapers to the community. You'll notice that they say this fact sheet is describing a permanent PFAS solution. The DNR communications involve a report that was filed in February of 2021. This was a report asking for approval of this proposed groundwater extraction and treatment system. The DNR has conditionally approved this report with comments and requirements in May of 2021. I am simply going to do a comparison of the information conveyed to the DNR versus the information communicated to the public. The current epicenter of the contamination is represented by the blue shape in this illustration. This is roughly at the intersection of Edwin Street and Pierce Avenue by the water tower. This area of blue can have PFAS contamination measuring in the hundreds of thousands of parts per trillion. The plume of contamination, however, is much larger and is represented by the green area, with the higher concentrations going to darker green and eventually ultimately turning to blue. The green area extends north to the Menominee River, south and east to the Bay of Green Bay and the town of Peshtigo. The proposed groundwater extraction and treatment system runs behind Woodland Cemetery adjacent to what is known as Ditch B. The system will attempt to extract contaminated groundwater and treat it before it can get to Ditch B and flow out into the Bay of Green Bay. The system will continue to extend south all the way to Richard Street, run along Pierce Avenue to the water tower, and run to the facility where the treatment equipment will be located behind the high school. There are 9 extraction wells piped to a treatment facility behind the high school. 2 of these wells are relatively close to the high school. 1 well is by the water tower. 3 wells run behind the cemetery. 1 well starts at the end of Oakview Street. Another well is located on Edwin Street. And the final well is located on Richard Street. Each well has a submersible pump connected to a distribution pipe that carries the contaminated groundwater to the treatment facility. Electricity will be required for each pump and is also located underground. The bottom of the intake screen varies from between 39 to 59 feet from the ground surface at the various locations. The pumps themselves are from 17 feet to 44 feet down. Each pump will move 25 gallons per minute of contaminated groundwater for a total of 225 gallons per minute for the 9 pumps. This is a profile of a typical well, which shows the pump located here and a filtering screen below it. This is a location of a pump on Oakview Road at the end of the road. That pump is connected to a line which continues on down to Edwin Street as it turns eastward. On Edward Street, we have a pump located roughly between Oakview and James Street. The line continues on to James Street and turns there. From James Street it turns to Todd, and from Todd to Richard. So at the corner of Todd and Richard Street is our last pump. In the engineering study submitted to the DNR, Tyco projected what would happen to the contamination plume over 30 years. They did a comparison of what would happen if the GET system was installed and what would happen if it was not installed. This is a depiction of the contamination plume over 30 years without a GET system. Here we are in year 0, and you'll notice that the contamination plume is basically at the shoreline of the Bay of Green Bay. Then we move to 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years out from now. What you notice is that most of the green plume stays pretty much where it is, except that there's a flow of groundwater being contaminated underneath the Bay of Green Bay at the end of year 30. This illustration shows what happens to the plume of contamination if the GET system is installed and is operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We notice that the blue area of highly concentrated groundwater has been reduced in size, although it does not go away. But we'll also notice that in the Bay of Green Bay, the contaminated groundwater has continued to flow in that direction. This is better illustrated by showing you the two charts next to each other. While you can see that the blue area of contamination has definitely decreased in size, the green area of contamination really hasn't changed at all and definitely continues to move out into the Bay of Green Bay. So what the report submitted to the DNR actually says, and I'm quoting, approximately 95% of the PFAS plume mass is estimated to be migrating along this flow path towards Ditch B. So 95% of the PFAS contamination is moving towards Ditch B. This is moving, not removed. The percentage of mass removed by the groundwater remediation system after 30 years of simulation is 57.6%. 57.6% is removed, not 95. So what this tells us is that some of this is going to be treated, but not all of it, not in 30 years. And it will not draw back any of this green area. So none of this is going to be treated, and some of this is going to be treated. And the Bay of Green Bay will continue to receive more PFAS as the groundwater migrates outside of Ditch B. The remediation focus area is depicted in orange dashes around the blue plume of contamination. These pie charts show the percentage of PFAS mass remaining in the groundwater remediation focus area over 30 years, and it is depicted in yellow. So after 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and 30 years, this is the amount of PFAS in the remediation focus area that will still remain. Looking at this chart a little closer, after 30 years with the GET system operating, the mass remaining within the remediation focus area is 36%. 95% of the PFAS is not eliminated from the groundwater, even in the focus area. What this fact sheet gets wrong? Well, this is not a permanent PFAS removal from groundwater and surface water for currently contaminated property or for the Bay of Green Bay. This is not getting us to clean water. and this will not eliminate 95% of the PFAS in the groundwater. This is not a permanent PFAS solution. Again, the opinions expressed in this presentation are my own, and they are not the official opinions of the City of Marinette or SOH2O. So this is what I think the hard truth is. Remediation of most properties is not possible. If you have PFAS contaminated groundwater on your property now, most, if not all of it, will still be there after 30 years of the GET system being operational. There is no proposed solution to remove and treat PFAS contaminated groundwater on your property, and it is unlikely that one could be proposed with the technology we know of today. So if you live in the Green Plume area on Daggett Street, on Thomas Street, on Logan Street, on Newberry, there's not much chance that that is ever going to get cleaned up as long as you live. If you live in the town of Peshtigo and you have contaminated property, you have a contaminated well, there's no proposed solution to clean that up. If it's on your property and you have a basement, it's likely to be surrounding the basement or directly underneath your basement. The Bay of Green Bay will continue to receive PFAS contaminated groundwater, and it will cause an increase in the contamination in the bay. There is no permanent solution to the PFAS problem, and the GET system will not get us to clean water. So what should be done besides GETs? And the word is mitigation. If we can't restore the groundwater, the surface water, etc., to a pre-contamination condition, how can we reduce or mitigate the negative effects to human health and the environment? City homeowners with basements in the plume should check for foam coming through the cracks in the concrete. Report it to the DNR and wear gloves or wash your hands thoroughly to avoid accidentally ingesting PFAS if you touch the foam. Chronically damp basements should be tested for PFAS in the dehumidifier water. Sump pump discharges should not be discharged onto lawns or in gardens. If contaminated groundwater reaches the garden, there's a chance that the plants could uptake it, and if it's on your lawns, your pets or your children might come in contact with it. Again, any sandpoint wells used to water lawns or gardens should be removed. And while there isn't a known home test at this time, air quality testing should be a goal for basements in the plume. What I think city government should do is prohibit all sandpoint wells within the City of Marinette. I think it should develop an ordinance requiring all excavations in the plume area to treat groundwater during dewatering for PFAS prior to discharging it into the storm or sanitary sewer. We should continue to test for PFAS in our drinking water, which we're currently doing, and we should continue to test for PFAS in the wastewater system, which we're currently doing. I believe we need to investigate technologies to remove PFAS from entering the drinking water system from the bay, because I do believe the bay is going to get more contaminated than it is today. We should also investigate technology to remove PFAS from the discharge of our wastewater treatment system to the Menominee River, because the current system does not take out PFAS, and much of it just flows through the wastewater treatment system and into the Menominee River, and ultimately into the bay, causing more contamination. Only the state of Wisconsin can apply the resources of the DNR, the Department of Health Services, University of Wisconsin, etc., and to direct a responsible party to do the decades of investigation and study that's going to be required for our communities. Research needs to be done on bay sediment contamination, medical monitoring of our citizens to see what the long-term health impacts of PFAS have been to our community, air deposition research to understand how breathing in PFAS, particularly in our homes, might affect us. Continue the wildlife studies they've already begun with deer and other animals, and particularly paying attention to fish, which we know PFAS accumulates in the fish in our area as well as in others. Who should fund these mitigation efforts? Well, Tyco JCI should fund them. They caused the problem, they're a responsible party for the problem, and they should fund all of these mitigation efforts, which will take decades. This is not a one-off. This isn't build a get system and we're done. This is decades and decades of research and efforts that we need to undertake. In summary, what I hope I've shown is that the engineering study that was submitted to the DNR to get approval to build the groundwater extraction and treatment system does not equal the public relations campaign that has been going on. In fact, the public relations campaign is very much misleading the public on what the system will actually accomplish. Until we have an honest dialogue where the facts are known, we can't make decisions as citizens what's in our best interest, nor can we hold Tyco responsible for what they need to do. So I hope we can get away from public relations and move into talking about facts and consequences. Before I leave, I just wanted to indicate something about basements, because you may think that's not much of a concern. There was a private home in the town of Peshtigo where foam had been sighted in the cracks in the basement. They had a well that was approximately 26 feet deep, and the well did test for PFAS between 140 and 200 parts per trillion for PFOA, and between 4.6 and 6.8 parts per trillion for PFOS. These tests were done in 2018 and 2019. You can see in this photo they only had a little bit of puddles to sample, but they did take samples and had the water tested that was in the basement. The readings in the basement were much higher than what they found in the well. Now, most of us, our basements are 8 feet or less below the ground level. The well was at 26 feet, but here PFOS was at 200 parts per trillion in the water on the floor of the basement, and PFOA was at 710 parts per trillion in that water, significantly higher than what they found in their well. I think this is an area where we don't know enough about the impact to our human environment inside our homes when we have contaminated groundwater surrounding and underneath our basements. That concludes my slide presentation. I hope this was informative, and please feel free to contact me and to follow me on Facebook to learn more about PFAS in the Marinette and Peshtigo area. Thank you very much.